Right, so greetings, hello, welcome to the Philosophy Club, the first one of the new year. Today is Sunday, and I believe it's the 5th of January, so tomorrow is Epiphany, celebrating the wise men coming, the Magi. And it's still part of the 12 days of Christmas. And in the Orthodox Christian world, in Greece, Russia and other parts, tomorrow, Epiphany is celebrated as the equivalent of Christmas Day, because it's the bringing of the presents. So, yes, so a happy Christmas still to everyone, and a happy New Year that's just gone. We've had a quiet one in the village, but, you know, it's been quite a marvellous season. I want to start, as usual, with my rundown of what I've been up to. And yes, I've been focused on completing my task, which is quite important, of finishing my work, The 99 Names of Peace, which is pretty much complete. I haven't yet managed to get it published because of some technical details, but it will be available for people that want a hard copy within probably a week or two, once I've had time to iron it out. But I'm working on a companion volume, which it was always my intention to publish these two things together, which is the actual dictionary that goes with it. The 99 Names of Peace is a study of 99 important languages in both history and currently. And it's a study of the origin of the language, the history, the people, the literature, the geography, you know, what that language has done for the world. Including, well, it's been fascinating to work on these 99 languages: Chinese, Arabic, Greek, Sumerian, Akkadian, Maori, Tibetan, Avestan, Pali, etc., etc. I mean, I've chosen, I think, one of the most important languages for the intellectual history of humanity, and if we're going to have a future, we have to calibrate and work out how to make peace between the cultures that use these languages. Because the longer I live, the more convinced I am that conflict, war, violence is a sort of disease of language, really. And we see that in many respects. We see it in the way that people cling to key ideas in their religious or intellectual systems, expressed in words, and then, you know, hold on to those and defend them for all they're worth. We see it in the way that political leaders misuse language to whip up a kind of mob consciousness, and to generate warlike instincts in people. And we see it also in the complete non-comprehension between these different cultures. Just Arabic and Hebrew, let's say. Palestinians that by and large speak Arabic, and the Hebrew or Israeli nation that by and large speaks Hebrew and some Yiddish. And of course French and English are quite common as well, and Russian. But there's a complete miscomprehension between these two traditions and cultures, which culminate in the tragic events we've had over the last period. But there are other cultures which have this similar linguistic divide, and the point of my book, 99 Names of Peace, is to try and build a bridge. I'm like a philosopher as an engineer of ideas and words, trying to do some engineering between these different mindsets to sponsor and foster mutual comprehension and understanding. In the Hebrew Kabbalah, Bina is the Sephiroth of understanding, and it's absolutely critical to our lack of Bina, lack of understanding going on. So that's why I've done the 99 Names of Peace, and it's epic, it's huge, it's 1,200 pages, and it's come out of a lifetime's love of languages. But then the companion volume is much smaller, and this is the actual dictionary, which doesn't give the history and culture of the languages. It gives simply the word lists in English, transliterated into the English alphabet, so anyone can read the words for truth, justice, love, peace, God, goddess, etc. in all these different languages. And it's got a few more languages. It's got more than 99. And it's got more actual, word lists than the 99 names of peace. So, but they go together. So you need the dictionary really. But if you can only get one, then get the dictionary, because it's a reference tool, and then you can do your own research into the history of the languages. But anyway, it's a labour of love, and I've just finished the dictionary. I'm just finishing it literally today, so that will probably actually be published first, which is appropriate because it was the first one I wrote. This was first written back in the even as long ago as the late 80s, 90s. I've been working on this question of a linguistic approach to peacemaking. Having studied the philosophy of language, at the university and elsewhere. So that's the first thing I want to say. The good news that is now more or less complete, that project. In doing that, I've come across, what I love about languages is they're an insight into the culture, the philosophy, the thought world of the people that speak languages. And I love them all. I don't have favourites, but one of the 99 favourites I have is ancient Egyptian. I've studied it for years. I've been to the British Library in London when it was in the British Museum studying it, and I've met Egyptologists and so on. And so the word list in ancient Egyptian is fascinating, and because it's a Hamito-Semitic language, it's got many links to Hebrew and Arabic and other Hamito-Semitic languages. So, but I've been studying the Hermetica, listening to a recording I made of the entire text. The Hermetica is one of the most important books in the history of the world, I would say, and it comes in my periodic table, which we'll look at in a minute, for the ancient Egyptian culture, which is number 4. It's a miracle that it survived. It was put into Greek in the time when ancient Egyptians and Greeks were, best friends. They were bilingual, and great thinkers like Zosimus and Plotinus and many of the great intellectuals of those times were active. And this miraculous text has survived. It's essentially the quintessence of ancient Egyptian wisdom, filtered through Neoplatonic minds active in, ancient Alexandria, around the time of Christ for a couple of centuries either way. It's tragic we don't have more, but at least we found this. And its rediscovery by Renaissance Florence under the Medicis was a miracle. It gave birth to the Renaissance when people realised the depth of wisdom that was in ancient Egypt, and why not bring it back? Why not bring back ancient wisdom was the way that Cosimo de' Medici thought, and I agree with him. And so did the intelligent Christians of the day, who said Christ didn't come to destroy all the ancient wisdom. He came to fulfill it and augment it. So there's a passage I found which I just want to quote, which is a rather sad passage, but it's worth knowing it exists. It's in Asclepius 3, where the teacher of Asclepius, who's the boy, is learning essentially from Hermes, or Thoth as he's called, Trismegistus in the text, which means thrice great. And he's saying that the world has really gone to the dogs. And given the state of the planet at the moment, I thought we'd begin with this, because it's not only now that people are feeling so bereft of anchor and mast and wind and where to navigate, how to get out of this chaos we're in. So it's a sad text, but worth knowing about. Do you weep at this, Asclepius? Says Hermes. There's worse to come. Egypt herself will have yet more to suffer. She will fall into a far more piteous plight, and she will be affected with even more grievous plagues. And this land, which once was holy, a land who loved the gods, and wherein alone in reward for her devotions the gods deigned to sojourn upon earth, a land which was the teacher of mankind in holiness and piety, this land will go beyond all in cruel deeds. The dead will far outnumber the living. O Egypt, Egypt, of thy religion nothing will remain but an empty tale, which thine own children in time to come will not believe. Nothing will be left but graven words, and only the stones will tell of their piety. And in that day men will be weary of life, and they will cease to think the universe worthy of reverent wonder and of worship. And so religion, the greatest of all blessings, for there is nothing, nor has been, nor ever shall be, that can be deemed a greater boon, will be threatened with destruction. Men will think it a burden, and will come to scorn it. They will no longer love this world around us, this incomparable work of God, this glorious structure which he has built, this sum of good made up of things of many diverse forms, this instrument whereby the will of God operates in that which he has made, ungrudgingly favouring man's welfare, this combination and accumulation of all the manifold things that can call forth the veneration, praise, and love of the beholder. Darkness will be preferred to light, and death will be thought more profitable than life. No one will raise his eyes to heaven. The pious will be deemed insane, and the impious wise. The madman will be thought a brave man, and the wicked will be esteemed as good. As to the soul, and the belief that it is immortal by nature, or may hope to attain immortality, as I have taught you, all this they will mock at, and even will persuade themselves that it is false. No word of reverence or piety, no utterance worthy of heaven and of the gods of heaven will be heard or believed. And so the gods will depart from mankind, a grievous thing, and only evil angels will remain, who will mingle with men and drive the poor wretches by main force into all manner of reckless crime, into wars and robberies and frauds and all things hostile to the nature of the soul. Now I wanted to start with that because to me that's the sort of summing up of where we're at. We're living in a time of inversion where piety is mocked, where theology is scorned, where outer power and material success is the only thing that's valued, and any talk of ethics or righteousness or what these spiritual teachings of humanity are about is just scoffed at by unfortunately by the sort of mass social media that dominates the public mind at the moment. And as a result, we get politicians being elected or seizing power who exemplify that kind of ideology, that sort of might makes right, anti-intellectual, lack of true piety and true reverence for anything outside their own egotistical arrogance. I mean, that has become the kind of public, thought world, and so we get vicious people come to power, and You don't need me to name the names of who they are. So as a philosopher, what is the remedy? Well, the Hermetica gives the remedy, and it describes it as true philosophy. It's very interesting in a slightly earlier passage in the work. Again, it could have been written today. It says true philosophy is piety towards the gods, is piety towards truth, is loving the gods so much that you want to understand them in detail, and knowing that you can never fully master, even the sort of base one. But it complains and says that's not what they teach in the schools as philosophy. In the schools they teach it's mathematics, it's subtlety of argument, it's dialectic, it's winning disputes. And the Hermetica, this is 2,000 years old, this book, says that's not philosophy. That's people who've hijacked the term and are misusing it to mean a sort of adjunct thing that they can augment their arrogance with. True philosophy is authentic spiritual wisdom. So, that's the essence of the reason I bother with these philosophy meetings, and why I've had a long career as a philosophy teacher. I mean, that's where I'm coming from. And I'm fortunate to have read the Hermetica, many years ago, and to have discovered that. And by the way, when I was in the Vatican Library in Rome, which is a place I love and know well, I noticed on the shelf, the great reading room has books, that you can take to your desk and stuff. The most well-thumbed book in the whole Vatican Library was the Hermetica. And it was an old edition that had been obviously read and read and read for generations. And I thought that's interesting. It's still a popular work even now in 21st century Rome, as it deserves to be. And, if I was the Archbishop of Canterbury, I'd stick it in the back of the Bible as an appendix, which was what the Medicis wanted. It's what John Dee wanted, who was Britain's magus at the time of the Renaissance, and who knew the book well. So anyway, as did they in France here as well. They knew and loved the Hermetica, and Francis I saw translations done into French. And alors, ça c'est pour le commencement. Now, I want to turn to a couple of other matters. The other language I've been looking at this week is Anglo-Saxon, which is another great language, which unfortunately isn't really taught to people either when they learn English as a foreign language or when they're native English speakers at a school in England. It's crazy, but nobody teaches them Anglo-Saxon. You have to go to university and study languages or something. As head of religious studies in schools in England, I always used to get my kids making a set of Anglo-Saxon runes, which was the writing system they brought when they came to the islands, and which has with it embedded in a whole cosmology of runic wisdom that fortunately has not vanished. I mean, it's still known. There are rune wisdom holders today. I recommend Freya Aspen's work, a feminist rune scholar who's written amazing books about this. And also Professor Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, was a great lover of the runes and knew all about them at Oxford. He was Professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford University for many years, where I used to teach, and he was a great scholar, and a runic master in his own right, and that's why he wove them into The Lord of the Rings, which is a fantastic work in my opinion. So Anglo-Saxon is fascinating, and if you want to understand the origin of how we think and speak in English, modern English, you need to study Anglo-Saxon, go right back to the roots of the words. One of the most interesting words is what we call elf, the elf, an elf. Aelf, A-E-L-F, was a spirit being in the Anglo-Saxon world, pagan world, and in the Christian world, that is like a kami in the Japanese Shinto world, or a dakini. It's like a spirit being that is not in body, but nevertheless has consciousness, has will, has intention can help and is there as a helper to mankind. They're like our elder brothers, if you want, spirit beings that are here to help us. And the greatest Anglo-Saxon king, my hero, one of, is King Alfred the Great, who also went to Rome, and he was reared to become a scholar. He loved books. He didn't want to take political power. He wasn't interested in all that. His elder brothers were going to be the king of Wessex to succeed their father. But in fact, they all died in battle because the Danes were invading, the Vikings, and they were romping around Wessex and attacking and defeating the Anglo-Saxon army. And it eventually fell to Alfred to become king. He didn't want it. But fortunately, because he was a learned man, he knew about classical tactics. He'd read Caesar and read about Alexander the Great's victories, and he knew all about the theory of warfare. So he put it into practice, and he trained up the Anglo-Saxon army. At one point, it was down to just a handful of men hiding out in the marshes of Somerset. But then he managed to train them, so they eventually defeated the Danish hordes. And he actually converted the king of the great army, as it was called, the Danish army, Guthrum, to Christianity and had him baptised. And they went off happily to live in Danelaw and became the East Anglian peoples that are still living there. But what Alfred knew is that the best way to secure the security of a land is to educate its people. So he founded monasteries, schools. At Oxford, we say he founded the University of Oxford, probably a teaching academy or something. He certainly, wherever he could, he founded educational centres. And he encouraged people to be literate, to learn Anglo-Saxon reading and writing. And he translated books from from Latin into Anglo-Saxon so people could read them. He was passionately in love with learning, and there's the famous story, which I've said many times. He grumbled to his bishop, Asa, that there was a problem that he didn't have enough time to read and study because he was too busy as a king. He had to give judgments, courts. Everyone, wanted his time. He didn't have enough solitary time for reading and study. And he said, Asa, you told me that when I die I'll go to heaven if I'm a good king. Is there a library in heaven, please? And Asa wrote back, this letter is extant, it's fascinating. Asa wrote back, who was a Welshman from St David's, Bishop of, and said, O king, yes, if there isn't one already, and I'm sure there is, but if not, they'll build one specially for you in heaven. Now, I love that story as a lover of books and learning myself, and I can think of nothing better than a heaven in which one can sit at a desk like in the Vatican Library and study the chronicles and histories of all the nations and cultures and languages of the world. And I would be pleased to meet Alfred there. I'm sure he's still there. So look, but the point I'm coming to is that his name, Aelfred, etymologically means, it comes from that same root, elf. Red means to take counsel or advice from. So Aelfred means he took counsel and advice from the spiritual beings that guide humanity. Aelfred. And that word red means advice, counsel. Also was the origin of our word to read in English. If you read something, you're taking advice, you're taking counsel from it, instruction. And that's the point of reading. So Alfred wasn't just reading books, he was reading the signs of the elves, the spirit beings that govern humanity's destiny. It's an amazing name to have, and if anyone out there is called Alfred or about to have a child, that's a very powerful name to give someone. And may we never forget that it is from that spiritual world that we do take counsel. This is why the Hermetic scriptures are lamenting the fact that if we lose that, we lose our way, if we just think in material terms. It's a very similar story in some ways to Numa Pompilius, who was the greatest king of Rome. Of all the kings of Rome, I like him best. He's the equivalent to Alfred, And he took counsel from the Kamini, who were the same spiritual beings that guide human destiny in the Roman culture. And he used to go and meet one particular Kamina, a muse, we would say in modern English, in the woods of ancient Rome. And she would instruct him in kingship and how to govern this turbulent city. And he brought religion to Rome. It was him that devised the ceremonies and rituals that kept the city going for millennia. So I wanted to start with that story because this is why studying language is so important, because you learn these things, and I'm always learning new things as I study languages, and it's language is the only tool we have actually ultimately to make peace on this planet, but we're not using it properly. And that's why I've given to the world this gift of the 99 names of peace. I may not be alive long enough to see it bear its fruit, but I think it's one of the most important works I've done. It also has 99 projects that are specific peace projects that, if they were implemented, would bring peace. I've given the recipe. If you don't believe me, please read the book. And it all began with my founding Philosophers of Peace, and then setting up the Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy at the University of London. So it comes out of 30 years of actual concrete peace-making endeavours and travelling all over the world to 35 countries, meeting some of the world's leading peace scholars and asking them, how are we going to get peace here? And that's what, I've put into this book, the 99 Names of Peace, not just the languages, but also the projects, which are the concrete ways, collectively as a planet, we can manifest peace. So I want to move on and talk about a couple of other people I've discovered that are very interesting during this week, and who bring a lot of wisdom that I want to share with you. So I want to share someone called Francis Bacon, or Tom Bacon, who lived from 1904 to 1992. I discovered him doing this research. To my shame, I'd never heard of him before. Now, he was a scientist. He died in 1992, and it was him that invented the fuel cells that power the satellites and the space capsules and the Apollo space missions. He was a British scientist, but we gave the Americans the technology to enable them to run their program. And he'd worked on this for some decades. He was a graduate of Cambridge in engineering and quite a genius who cracked the system. Now, fuel cells take hydrogen and oxygen and convert them into electricity. And he worked out how it can be done, and he was, a pioneer of this. And that basic invention is still powering all our space flights in terms of energy. What's interesting to me is he was a direct descendant of Francis Bacon, the founder of, one of the key founders of modern scientific method, who was also a Cambridge graduate and one of my heroes, another one, and who wrote this famous book, The New Advancement of Learning, The Advancement of Learning, which was a survey of all known knowledge at that time. It was published in its definitive final edition in 1624, dedicated to King James. And I'm calling for a second edition of this book to be done. The world's top scientists and intellectuals should come together and collectively we write a new advancement of learning, just as Bacon did. And what Bacon did is extraordinary, really. He made a list of all the fields of knowledge which were then known. And he said, we know a lot about this, but we know virtually nothing about that. And we know absolutely zero about that, and we don't even have a word for it. Like fuel cells, it wasn't invented. There was no such concept in the 17th century. So he invented new words in the book, and he defined whole new branches of knowledge and science. So I'm suggesting we do the same. The way we do it is we ask maybe the 10 brightest scientists from each nation. I don't know how we select this out. And we ask in each different knowledge field, and we ask them what they don't know. So these would be top people in biology and zoology, in geography, in history, in chemistry, in engineering, in data science, and we'd say, well, okay, what do you still not know? Also linguistics, say. So every branch of knowledge, including the humanities, things like sociology and religious studies even, we could say, well, what don't you know? That would be the place to start the new advancement of learning, because it's always what we don't know into which we will then grow. And that, if we got the, 1,000 or 999 greatest scientists on the planet to write what they don't know, it would be a work that, it would give people their marching orders for a few hundred years. So anyway, that's that, and it was lovely to find Tom Bacon was actually doing this stuff. I never met him, but we may have had friends in common, because I've known some members of the Royal Society. Now, so I want to mention another scientist I've just discovered. By the way, he was the son of another Sir Thomas Bacon, 1863 to 1950. They're both going in my Book of Thomases, of course. Who was also a scientist, and that sort of bug of finding out truth and knowledge, which is a hallmark of science, often is passed down in families. I think I like Vico's idea that the new science is encompassing not just material science, but moral science, ethics, philosophy, metaphysics. These are also scientific knowledges, if approached in the right way, which, of course, my suggestion for the new advancement of learning would so approach. And then I want to share somebody else, because I really love where research takes one, and in the studies I'm doing into languages and peace, it's taken me on some fascinating journeys. And here's something I want to share that I find quite fascinating and very inspirational, actually. If you followed my philosophy club and my work, you'll know I've written a book called Philosophiae Religionis Principia Mathematica, which is a sequel to Newton's work on the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. My work is a sequel, as in it's the philosophical principles of religious philosophy. And it's approached, from a different angle to Newton. But I did it because Newton's great work ends by saying, in this book I've explored gravity, I've explained how it works, I've given the maths, but I want to just add an addendum here. I haven't got a clue what causes it, or where it comes from, or how it's sustained, or how anything. But I suspect, said Newton, it's got something to do with God, because God is probably some kind of a thing, or a phenomenon, or a consciousness that pervades all of space and time, and therefore it must somehow be an epiphenomenon of God's mind, this thing we call gravity. And that's what Newton wrote way back when he published his work. When I read that on a trip to Cambridge, I thought, well, there we are. Let's write that book about religious mathematics applied to God studies, gods plural.